Hello everyone, welcome to this webinar on WIOA Title I for VR professionals. My name is Jessica and I'm a WITAC team member. This webinar is being recorded, and the webinar recording, PowerPoint, and transcript will be emailed to participants within 3 business days. The audio should be coming in from your computer speaker, so please adjust your volume accordingly. And before we begin, let's go over a few things. On the top right-hand corner, you're able to download our PowerPoint presentation at any time during the webinar. Below that is the links pod where you'll see our participant evaluation. We'd really appreciate if you could take 5 minutes to complete this right after the webinar. It helps us ensure that we're providing high-quality training and technical assistance. And right below that, you'll see our Q&A box. Feel free to ask your questions to our presenters, and they'll be sure to answer them throughout the webinar. And at the very bottom, you can participate in conversation with the attendees and speakers. So I hope you enjoy this webinar, and I'll hand things over to Kim Osmani.
Can anybody hear me?
Yes, Kim.
Thank goodness. Okay, I was having a problem there. Welcome, everybody, and we're excited to have you all to attend this first webinar in a series of 3 webinars that we have on this new curriculum guide that will be coming out hopefully in April that really focuses on the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, Title I and Title IV partnerships between workforce and vocational rehabilitation. So we can go to the next slide. Oh, I'm supposed to forward it, aren't I? Okay, I can do that. We've got several presenters today that are going to share a lot of wonderful information, and I don't want to take up too much of our time to allow them, the majority of the time, to talk about what's in the curriculum guide in the first toolkit part of it, as well as a state example in Minnesota. And so we will have staff from the National Youth Employment Coalition, Thomas Showalter and Cato Sullivan, talk with us, as well as Alyssa Klein and Michelle Uford. I know I'm probably butchering that. I'm sorry. From Minnesota, to be able to share information with us. And like Jessica said, I'm Kim Osmani, and I'm one of the technical assistance liaisons with the Voc Rehab Youth Technical Assistance Center. At the end of the webinar, there is going to be an evaluation that we ask you please to complete so that we can understand your level of knowledge gain in this area, as well as how to improve for future webinars. So be sure at the very end you'll have a link through Adobe Connect in which you can provide your feedback. Also, we have put in paperwork to get approval for CRCs for rehab counselors. Nothing has been finalized yet, but what we do ask is at the end of the webinar, you definitely have to complete the evaluation, and then you can email Jessica Fuentes-Diaz to put in that request, and as soon as it has been approved, we'll have information coming back to you. But as of right now, we don't have that in place, so you'll want to be in communication with Jessica about that. Lastly, I want to tell you just a little bit about the Voc Rehab Youth Technical Assistance Center, as we refer to it as the WITAC. It is among several technical assistance centers out there, and we are actually led by the Institute for Educational Leadership in Washington, D.C., who then partners with Cornell University, Boston University, and other subject matter experts from all across the country to ensure that we are helping to support the Voc Rehab agencies in their work with youth. IEL is in Washington, D.C., and they've got several long-standing programs and partnerships, one of which is the Center for Workforce Development and the National Center for Workforce Development, specifically focusing on youth. They really do a lot to engage young populations and help them develop leadership skills, as well as supporting other populations in terms of transition and employment. So for our center, our national center, We provide training and technical assistance to state voc rehab agencies to really help them find and engage youth with disabilities in a variety of populations, but specifically one population is those students who are in school that have disabilities but aren't necessarily served on an IEP through the special education services in their school districts. They could be those that are on 504 plans or not.
You're currently breaking up.
We also help find and engage out-of-school youth and those that are not employed. So we talk about, say, opportunity youth populations, youth who are in foster care, youth who are involved in the juvenile justice system, dropout.
Kim, hello?
Individuals with
Can you hear me, Kim? You're breaking up right now.
Who maybe are out of school and not employed or underemployed. Or not engaged in post-secondary education, homeless youth, teen parents, pregnant teens. So a very wide range of populations. In addition to YPAC, there are also 4 other national centers that focus on supporting students and youth with disabilities. There's, excuse me, the Workforce Innovation Technical Assistance Center out of San Diego State University, the National Technical Assistance Center on Transition, which is out of University of Charlotte, the Promise TA Center that focuses on issues related to Social Security.
Great. Hi, this is Thomas Showalter. Can everybody hear me? Am I sounding okay, Jessica?
Yes. Yes. Thank you.
Hopefully. Terrific. Yeah, thank you so much, Jessica, for setting this up and making this so seamless. As anybody who's organized webinars before knows, it's no small feat. So thank you very much. Yeah, we here at NYC are really honored to be partnering with YTAC. It's really exciting that YTAC is structured the way it is, that it's focused on out-of-school youth with disabilities. That's a really exciting focus area. And we've been really honored to work with IEL as part of YTAC. So the work that we've been doing is actually a good illustration of kind of what NYC does generally, which is sort of lift up good practices from around the country. You know, and we have members all over the country, including Minnesota DEED, who you're about to hear from. But this is really kind of at the center of what we try to do. So I am going to, I believe, turn it over to Kate for the next couple slides.
Yes, indeed. Can you all hear me? Do I sound okay, Jessica? Yes. I'll check in with you now. Hello, everybody. Thanks, Thomas. It is really a pleasure to be on the webinar today. Just going to give you a little bit of background and context for what we're going to be covering. As YTAC got into its work with state VR agencies around the country, they found there was a strong interest among VR professionals in learning more about partnering with the workforce system. And as many of you know, I saw from our initial poll that many of you were somewhat familiar with the different pieces of WIOA. But VR is authorized under a law called the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, or WIOA for short. VR is under Title IV of WIOA, which is the Rehab Act. Title I of WIOA authorizes the workforce system. And even though VR and workforce are part of the same federal law, they've tended to stay in their lanes, as is common in most systems. You know, that's just sort of how things operate. Doesn't really matter what field you're in. WIOA has encouraged greater partnership, and VR professionals that YTAC has been working with have really wanted to know more about how to do that. So YTAC asked NYC to develop a guide to help VR professionals understand the Title I workforce system, as well as get a better sense of the how to partner with workforce. WITAC also asked NYEC to capture some of the proven strategies for working with what Title I calls out-of-school youth. Many youth with disabilities qualify as out-of-school youth under Title I. And Thomas is going to be talking a bit like that, a bit about that. Out of school doesn't necessarily mean that someone isn't attending school. So he'll talk about that a little bit. But there's a real potential for partnering to leverage resources as service, in order to serve a population of young adults who is, not in sort of a traditional special education program in a school. To develop the guide, NYEC interviewed over 20 VR and workforce professionals. We talked to people in small, medium, and large states all over the country. We talked with 14 states. And as Kim said, the guide is going to be coming out this spring, hopefully in April. And all of you who are registered for this webinar will receive a notice when the guide is released. In the meantime, WITAC is sponsoring this webinar series to highlight some of the lessons captured in the guide. And today's the first webinar, so thank you for joining us. Just so you know, the next webinar is actually tomorrow, and it's going to be focusing on serving out-of-school youth for VR professionals. We're going to be talking a bit about what the research says about proven practices, and we're also going to have with us a practitioner from a program that's pretty well known around the country for its work with out-of-school youth. So there'll be some good information that's really about the hows there as well. Then our third and final webinar will be on April 1st, and that's going to be about establishing interagency partnerships. We're going to be learning about approaches from a state where the VR, workforce, and juvenile justice agencies have actually established quite a vibrant partnership for serving youth with disabilities. So we're looking forward to that. If you'd like to learn more about either of these webinars or register to be on them, just feel free to click on the link that's provided, and that'll take you right to the page on the WITAC website with the information and ability to register. So just really briefly, some basics on WIOA Title I. Again, I could see from our survey that most of you already have a sense, but in case there are a few who haven't been involved for as long, just I already sort of mentioned that both the Workforce Development System and the VR system do come under this act called WIOA, or Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, and VR is under the Rehab Act, which is Title IV. Title I is Workforce Development. So the way that Workforce Development System is set up is that federal funding goes to each state, and the governor, the state, can keep a certain amount for statewide workforce development activities, and then the rest goes down to local areas for local activities. All of these funds are by formula, and there are activities that can be provided for adults, for dislocated workers, and for youth. So each state establishes their local workforce areas, and each of those areas has what's called a local workforce development board, which oversees the workforce activities, funding strategies under WIOA for that area. The members are appointed by the chief local elected official in that area, and it's required that there is at least 50% of the members are from business. VR is also a required partner, so many of you on the phone may have served or currently serve on your workforce development board. Some boards choose to have a committee that is actually focused on these activities. It's an option, having a youth committee. We also just wanted to note here that these local workforce development boards can be called by different names depending on where they're housed in a given community. So, in some areas it may be Communities Workforce Development Board. In another area it may have a name. For example, a workforce development board that I work with a lot, I live in the Washington, D.C. area, and one of the boards in Northern Virginia is called SkillSource. So that's their name. So they can have different names depending on where they are. The local workforce boards also run the American Job Centers, or the one-stops, and this is where adult activities, it's sort of a hub for adult workforce activities for 18 and up. And some VR agencies may have offices in those one-stops, or may come by, every week or every other week, and then in some areas they're not co-located. So it's developed differently in different states. One thing to note also is that the local workforce areas are not necessarily the same geographically as local VR units or VR offices. So one of the things we did for the guide was we actually looked at 3 states and we mapped out, okay, where are the workforce areas? You know, what are the boundaries of each of the workforce areas locally, and then what are the boundaries of the local VR units? And we often found that a VR local office overlapped with 2 different workforce boards, or 3 even. And the same could be true on the other side, where you had a workforce area that overlapped with more than 1 VR agency. So it's not exactly the same geographic structure. So that's just a really, really quick overall basic. And the guide has a little bit more information about sort of the 101 of WIOA. So for you or for any colleagues that you have who may be new to Title I, you may find that part of the guide useful. I am going to turn it over to Thomas to talk a little bit more about, you know, why partner, you know, why does it make sense to work across systems?
Great, thanks, Kate. I also just wanted to pick up on what Kate was talking about in terms of the context of different titles across WIOA working together. And you know, this conversation we're having now really gets at the heart of the legislative intent for WIOA, right? That you know, there are a wide variety of job seekers in the United States, and the whole idea with WIOA and maintaining the separate programs that it does is to recognize those unique needs, but also encourage collaboration across those systems to maximize the services in an overstretched set of systems. And I am very glad to see that the vast majority of you have at least heard of WIOA Title I. That's terrific. I want to give the caveat that what we're talking about today, or at least what Kate and I are talking about, is the structure of WIOA laid out in federal statute and federal regulations. As Kate noted, in your states, workforce boards may be called something different. One-stop centers may be called something different. Every state organizes these things differently, and you may even have regulations promulgated by your state on top of some of the federal regulations that might create new or different considerations. We're just trying to give, you know, kind of start a conversation about how to translate, you know, across these systems. And it actually, as I was just looking at the slides now, it occurred to me that one of those areas where we sometimes we have had some conversations is in that slide laying out the different titles of WIOA. You know, in most of the workforce development world, the Rehab Act is referred to as Title IV. That's because within WIOA, the Title IV of the law WIOA is a set of amendments to the Rehab Act. It actually is amendments throughout the Rehab Act, which is why, you know, when we talk about Section 504 or Section 511, those are the underlying sections in the underlying Rehab Act. But within the way that WIOA is set up, all those amendments to those sections happen within Title IV of WIOA. So that's just a you know, a note that there are a lot of different levels on which we kind of have to translate across these different systems, and it's strengthening those muscles that are going to make us all better collaborators and partners with our colleagues. So what I'm really going to quickly talk about, and as Kim mentioned, we have this really in-depth curriculum guide coming out hopefully in April that goes into more detail about all the stuff Kate and I are talking about, including some maps of different states and how VR regions and WIOA regions don't necessarily overlap. A lot of really interesting resources. I'm just quickly going to note a little bit about the eligibility for Title IV clients and Title I clients, and a little bit about how Title I can benefit from working with VR and vice versa. So as many of you might know, the vast majority of VR clients who are between 18 and 24 are going to be eligible for WIOA Title I services. So, a young person with a disability who's between 16 and 24 and not attending school is automatically eligible for WIOA youth services. Without regard to income, just the fact that they're a person with a disability who's not in school and in that age range means that they qualify. For youth with disabilities who are attending school, they are subject to a low income requirement, but in the regulations they are considered a family of one, so only their income is considered in that income tax test. So, as you can imagine, that de facto means that they're low income and are very likely to be eligible for WIOA youth services. So this is kind of part of the overall goal of WIOA to make it easier for these young people to get served across systems. You see here on the slide that's up, there's a link, the Title I/VR service comparison. That's actually a link which I think is working now to a chart that we put together that just compares some of that compares VR services and services under WIOA Youth. And what and these WIOA youth services are actually required to be provided by every local workforce development board and are actually pretty extensive. The title is underfunded, but ideally, financial literacy, there's guidance and counseling, there's a lot of services that local workforce development boards must be providing to young people. So it can be a great value to your VR clients. WIOA Youth also requires something called the Individual Service Strategy, which is similar to the Individualized Plan for Employment in the Rehab Act, which the curriculum guide that we'll be putting out goes into in more detail. Yeah, so how can VR and Title I programs help each other? So one of the biggest changes in WIOA was this push for WIOA Title I youth providers to serve more out-of-school youth. So they're now trying to get up to a requirement of 75% of their dollars going toward out-of-school youth. So obviously, VR clients who are not in school are basically automatically eligible for those Title I services and can help young people, help Title I providers meet that requirement. There's also an increasing awareness within kind of the youth development field generally that there are a lot of the young people who are out of school and out of work, who we refer to as opportunity youth, have either diagnosed or undiagnosed disability, and that's actually a really important intersection that we need to take more consideration of. There are also a lot of shared performance measures across the WIOA titles. Again, you might, I'm probably telling you things that you already know, but when it comes to tracking things like earnings of program participants, credential attainment, employment 2 quarters and 4 quarters after exit, VR and WIOA Youth are getting credit for the same measures. Another area that I think has played out really differently across the country is this infrastructure cost piece that was also new in WIOA, where all the different programs under WIOA are supposed to contribute to the funding of the one-stop system that's laid out in WIOA. And I know that this might or might not be directly relevant to the folks on the webinar now, but VR agencies are supposed to be putting in money toward the infrastructure cost of the system and through a negotiated process, which I hope those VR leaders are using as leverage to improve the accessibility of one-stop centers, or to get more get more co-location of staff, get more providers who are coming and co-locating, or at least spending some hours at your VR offices, or vice versa. So that that to me has always been an area of a potential leverage point for some really increased collaboration. But you know, it's another area where you know, I hear kind of different things around the country about how that's actually playing out. Then the final thing I noticed that I did not, in my introductory remarks, did not note that another way to continue this conversation beyond these webinars is actually an all-day convening that we're organizing with YTAC that's happening in May. If you go to nyec.org, our link was is in the PowerPoint deck. You'll see a banner at the top of the page with information about that All Youth Working Forum, where there will be a YTAC Learning Lab. So I hope that some of you are able to join for that. And I believe now I am turning it over to Alyssa and Michelle.
Before we have Alyssa and Michelle start, we wanted to put another poll question up there and see if your VR transition clients are also accessing services from WIOA Title I Workforce Partners. So if you could take a minute to respond to the poll, it's a real quick yes or no, or a no vote. And overwhelming majority, that's amazing that there's already a nice level of partnership developed across states to have students access or transition clients access those services. Wonderful. All right, so Jessica, if we can close the poll. Thank you. So Alyssa and Michelle, we are so excited to have you both today and cannot wait to hear about the partnership that's going on in Minnesota. So take the stage.
Okay, I'll start. This is Alyssa Klein. Hello, everyone. I am the statewide transition specialist for Minnesota's Vocational Rehabilitation Services Program. I'm very excited to be here today with my friend and WIOA Title I partner, Michelle Ufford. I will be giving you a state-level perspective of the WIOA Title I VRS partnership in Minnesota, and then Michelle will be giving the local level view of how our partnership works. All right. So this slide gives a big picture view of Minnesota's workforce system. All of our state and federal workforce programs are administered through the Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development, otherwise known as DEED. Vocational Rehabilitation Services, or VRS as we call it here, is a division of DEED along with Title I. We have 16 local workforce development areas, or LWDAs, which have LWDBs, local workforce development boards, in our state. And there's a map linked to this slide in case you're interested in seeing how those are divided up. We have about 50 career force locations, which are our one-stop or American Job Centers, and both WIOA Title I and VRS are co-located at these locations along with many other partners. Career Force is a new branding initiative in our state, and we are in the process of building a robust virtual presence, among other things, and I also have the link to that site on here. So essentially, both Title I and VRS are advertising the Career Force brand so that the public sees us all as a part of one entity. This slide is just a high-level view of Minnesota's VRS program, with a few statistics in case you were interested. It's always nice when you're from another state to kind of get a view of numbers and things like that. As you can see, we served roughly 16,000 individuals with disabilities in federal fiscal year 2018, and roughly half of those individuals were transition-age students and young adults through the age of 24. So moving on to the partnership that we wanted to highlight today. As most of you are very familiar with, one of the new set of services that is called out in WIOA is Pre-Employment Transition Services, or PREETS. And just in case there's someone in the audience who isn't familiar with PREETS, VR programs across the country are to have these 5 activities available to all students with disabilities, including those who are potentially eligible for VR. I won't go into PREETS today since most of you in the audience are from a state VR program and know it already, But if you aren't familiar, I have the link to our Minnesota PREETS website on the next slide where you can learn more. And the other thing I wanted to note is that while today Michelle and I are talking about PREETS and the partnership we have related to that, I want to emphasize that this partnership can be translated to any other populations, such as out-of-school youth or adults. I think the key is that we have figured out how we can align our systems and outcomes in serving individuals. So that would be the big takeaway I hope you get from our presentation. Okay, and so here's the slide where you'll see that link on the bottom to our website that explains PREETS more. So the method that we have chosen to provide PREETS to potentially eligible students in Minnesota has been to award grant contracts to community agencies to provide those services. The first thing I want to note about that contracting process is that VRS worked with our Title I youth partner at the state level. So we're both under the Department of Employment and Economic Development, and they helped us put the original request for proposals together because they had already been doing granting of contracts to providers to serve youth. And so they knew how to do that. They helped advise us on what to include in the RFP. They helped us review proposals. So it was really helpful at that state level to have that help. We posted our first request for proposals, or RFP, in 2017, and then also issued another one last year in 2018, which has yielded 12 contracted PREETS providers in our state. And interestingly, 9 of the 12 organizations that were awarded grants were local workforce development areas, or Title I partners. So that means 9 of our 16 LWDAs are partnering with us on PREETS. The expectation is that our PREETS providers will do outreach in all of the high schools in their region, get students registered for PREETS services, and then provide the 5 required services to students in either a one-on-one basis or in a group setting. The exciting thing is that in Minnesota, our Title I partners were already doing this type of outreach in schools to the general student population due to the fact that, unfortunately, Minnesota ranks as one of the lowest in the nation for numbers of school guidance counselors. So there's already a need to have extra support in our schools, and our Title I partners were really picking up, realizing that need and providing services to schools. So because of that experience that they already had, they were well poised to add special outreach to students with disabilities. So in a moment, Michelle Ufford, who again represents one of the 9 LWDAs doing the PREETS work, will be giving you more of a look at how specifically they are providing those PREETS services. But what I want you to know before she comes on is that because of this PREETS partnership, the working relationships between our VRS staff and our Title I partners has increased dramatically. This last summer, after the first school year of these PREETS partnerships wrapped up, I went around the state and attended site visit meetings with each local Title I partner, along with our VRS staff in the region, to talk about how the year went. This first quote, I think, summed up what I heard consistently all over the state from both Title I and VR. And it says, "We have always been partners, but this has brought us closer. We have learned things about our systems that we didn't know existed." And what that tells me is that it isn't until you really make a concerted commitment to partner on an individual student level that you can really understand the intricacies of how your systems can work together. And once you have laid that foundation, you can then go out into the schools and the community with what we're calling a no wrong door approach. In other words, our schools will get a little confused sometimes about who they should refer students to, because essentially both of our agencies are now providing similar programming. But if we tell the schools, and better yet show the schools, that it doesn't matter who they refer students to, that we from the workforce system can figure out who will provide what behind the scenes, then you can gain their trust, and the system can work for more students than just one agency can do. Another highlight is that students served by Title I partners can also help, well, our Title I partners can help those students enroll in other programming that they provide when a student needs a higher level of support. So, of course, that would mean the Title I WIOA Youth Program, or another alternative that we have through state funding in Minnesota is the Minnesota Youth Program, which gives our providers dollars for work readiness and work experiences. So the benefits is that the students get paid work experiences without us having to use VR dollars, and students can also get more intensive supports without having to apply for VRS. And then lastly, kind of on the flip side, our pre-ETS providers work with some students that have more significant needs due to their disability. And thus they will make those referrals to the VR program. So when that is the case, we are oftentimes then blending all of our funding streams together to work toward the best individual outcomes for those students. Okay, so that is my review from the state level here in Minnesota, and now I'm going to hand the mic over to Michelle Ufford, who will talk about her local workforce development area and how the pre-ETS partnership has gone in her region. Looks like we have a poll, though, first.
So if you take a minute to look at the poll that we have up, it's asking you how satisfied you are with the current level of partnership you or your agency has between the two systems, the voc rehab system and the workforce system, specifically in supporting youth. And the scale goes from 0, which is not at all satisfied, all the way to 4, which is extremely satisfied, offering you a neutral option as well in the middle. And it's really interesting to see that there's over 40, well, about 38 to 40% right now is in the lead with being neutral. And I would say that that's pretty common across the country in conversations that we have. There are definitely pockets of excellence that occur, and I'm sure even within your own state you could say there are pockets of excellence because every workforce board operates differently, every VR unit probably operates differently. So it's interesting to see how those numbers are fleshing out, and that's, I think, 30, 60, 70, 80, about 90, almost 100 people out of the 170 have responded. So it's a pretty good representation. Thank you all for your responses.
Well, thank you, Alyssa, for the great introduction to what we have going on in Minnesota. It's a pleasure to be here with everybody this afternoon. This is Michelle Ufford. I am the Executive Director of the Northeast Minnesota Office of Job Training, which is, as you can see here in red, that is our workforce development area. It's a very large rural area. Before I get into what we are doing in partnership with VRS and some of the pre-ETS work that we've done, I wanted to give everybody on the phone the context of the kind of region we're talking about. There are vast differences across the country between rural areas and metro areas. For the most part, we are an extremely rural area. We've got about 6% of the state's population and almost 21% of the state's geography. So that's 6% of the state's population spread over 18,000 square miles in our region. Our economy is largely healthcare and social assistance, retail, tourism, government, education. The big moneymaker from a tax perspective is iron ore mining, which is used to make steel. But we are the only region in Minnesota that has suffered a loss of labor force since 2005. We have more people aging out of the workforce than entering, and we're expecting a 2.3% decline between now and 2040 versus the projected increase for Minnesota overall of 8.8%. So these statistics of growing scarcity of workers is now really recognized here as one of the region's most significant barriers to future economic growth. It's more important than ever to diversify our workforce, which really underscores the importance of working closely with VRS and creating deliberate, cooperative opportunities to move individuals with disabilities into the workforce. So the Office of Job Training is a regional unit of county government. Other Title I providers here in Minnesota are also county government based, they could be part of municipal government or nonprofit entities, and I imagine that that is much the same for the rest of the country. We co-located with other service providers in our one-stops way back in 1998 under the Workforce Investment Act, including Title IV VRS programs. Also with Title II, which is Adult Basic Education, and Title III, which is Wagner-Pizer, or the Federal Labor Exchange programs. And we also included in our regional system tribal government employment and training programs, veterans programs, and employment and training community action programs. So we really did take the letter of the law very seriously here in Minnesota and put everybody under one roof. You know, it's easier said than done, but I can say as somebody who came in right after that transition happened that it has done so much for our system as a whole and our partnerships across the board, to say nothing of the partnerships that we've developed with VRS. That co-location really is an opportunity for staff to get to know each other on a personal level, which is exactly what you need to understand each other's programs and to feel comfortable working together. So I would say that here co-location has been real key. As an organization, the Office of Job Training is no stranger to working with individuals with disabilities. In fact, about 20% of our entire adult caseload, which includes the WIOA Title I programs that serve dislocated workers and adults, in addition to our state's dislocated worker program, and our TANF caseloads, our public assistance caseloads, are individuals with disabilities. And as an organization, we have always been very highly youth-focused. We recognize that focusing on the future workforce is extremely worthwhile, especially here to help combat the notion that there aren't any jobs. Most students seem to think they need to flock to the metro areas to really find success, and that is absolutely not true. In fact, right now I believe we've got 0.8 job seekers to every job vacancy, so we really need all hands on deck here. And we have extensive experience through our work in the public programs, placing students in work experience, including youth with disabilities. 64% of our total youth caseload, which is the federal WIOA programs plus our Minnesota Youth Program, have a disability. So we are no stranger to this work at all. About 18% of those say their disability is a barrier to employment. And I just want to give a little shout out to Thomas's comment earlier about how valuable it is for Title I providers to partner with VRS. So it's definitely a two-way street. As he mentioned, the vast majority of our federal Title I youth funding must be spent on out-of-school youth, which can be a very, very difficult population to engage. And so we have found very great success here in our region of working with VRS, identifying those people with disabilities that qualify as out-of-school youth. In fact, about 50% of our WIOA out-of-school youth population have a disability right now. So a little bit more context around how we came into the pre-ETS work and the detail that Alyssa alluded to earlier. I'd like to talk a little bit more about our Northeast Career Adventure program. For a long time, we recognized the need for schools to provide better career guidance to students. As Alyssa mentioned, Minnesota, bottom of the heap for the most part on that ratio of students to guidance counselors. It was something like 750 to 1, I think, when we were looking at the numbers back in 2012. And so here we sit as the public workforce development system where all we do is, you know, eat, sleep, and breathe career readiness and career exploration. It just seemed like a very simple concept to try to find a way to share what we know with schools without those government strings attached that we're probably all very familiar with in terms of eligibility and only being able to provide services to very specific populations. So we applied for a grant from the state to develop an initiative to provide what we know to students in our region, regardless of eligibility or income or disability status or any of that. And because career readiness is our wheelhouse, bringing two public systems together to become more efficient and to better inform our future workforce, seemed like a no-brainer. And it turns out it was. This project was funded in 2012, and we've been refining it ever since. As part of this Career Adventure Initiative, which is what we dubbed this particular suite of resources, we've developed a whole host of resources on a wide variety of topics that include presentations, facilitator guides, fact sheets, different classroom activities, career exploration themed games based on popular game shows and board games, things to make the topics more engaging and relatable. And as a result of our early success with this curriculum has now been shared with all of our Title I counterparts across the state of Minnesota. What's important to note about this initiative, though, is that it is our staff that are delivering these resources in our local schools. And I can tell you the teachers are appreciative that it's not us heaping some more curriculum and some more work and some more stuff to do on their shoulders, but it's us coming in to do what we do best and share what we know best, and it gives them a little bit of a break. So it's really, really worked out well, and today we now provide these resources to over 40 districts in our region. So that really made us very well positioned to be a part of the Pre-ETS project. You can see on the slide here on the left is just the very basic topics that we offer through Career Adventure compared to Pre-ETS on the right, and you can see the alignment is striking. Some of our Career Adventure services include that comprehensive assessment of personality, interests, values, abilities, with the added enhancement of now what, right? We're not just throwing a report at a student and saying, there you go, there's your life, figure it out. We use that as a basis for the counseling relationship where we help them explore what some of those top-ranking interests or skills may be. We've also developed a 4-part financial literacy series that includes basic money management, taxes, financial aid, a whole gamut of financial literacy topics. We do a lot on job search strategies, including the job search process, applications, resumes, cover letters, interviewing, that sort of thing. And then we developed a 4-part series that focuses on workplace readiness called Navigating Business Culture, which talks about the different cultures of school, home, and the workplace, how different generations interact in the workplace, employer expectations, the future world of work. This is really in response to what we kept hearing from employers about, fist in the air, students today, they don't get it, they're not prepared. And so we've developed this to really introduce students to what's expected of them. We've got a whole bunch of resources and presentations about exploring post-secondary training, including the variety of options out there. One of the really important messages for us when we started Career Adventure was dispelling the notion that it is only with a 4-year degree that one can be successful. We talk a lot about apprenticeship and certificate programs and career and technical education. Now, the only piece that we didn't have under Career Adventure that was part of Pre-ETS was the self-advocacy. But lo and behold, the stars aligned, and we discovered that one of our youth counselors actually did her master's in education thesis on self-advocacy. So here we had this ready-made resource that we developed into a 3-unit series on self-advocacy. The first unit deals with learning styles, understanding how the brain works, what kind of individual learner a student is, and how that relates to not only academic things like studying and taking tests, but also to the world of work. We've got a unit that talks about strategies for self-advocacy that really demonstrates to students how they can speak up for themselves through some situational role-playing sorts of things, how to get their needs met and recognize opportunities to advocate for themselves in daily activities. And then the third piece is knowing your rights. And this helps students understand laws related to disability, like the Rehabilitation Act, IDEA, ADA, all the things you guys know inside and out, but how that relates to education. And then the key piece to this is we talk a lot about how to be successful in that post-secondary environment and the difference between high school and college in terms of expectations and available resources. If a student doesn't have experience in that sort of environment, they may not really know what to expect. And it's our experience that if you kind of arm students really of any kind, of any background, with some knowledge of what to expect and how to navigate some of those unknowns, that they're far more successful. But what's more, we're helping students identify their strengths and really encouraging them to understand their disability and how it relates to school and work. And with all of those things, we've got the fun games and things to try to make it a little bit more engaging. So when we started this process with VRS, the very first step was the state VRS staff, very critical to helping us understand the context of this project and how it differs from our previous experience. Alyssa and her staff were fantastic and came out and provided the things you see here on this slide. Really wading into the specifics of disability designation was a real eye-opener for my staff. You know, we are not VRS counselors. We have experience working with individuals with disabilities, but by and large, we just don't have that specialty. So it gave us a chance to start talking about how we could adapt our career adventure materials for this project. After we got that start, we worked with our local special education cooperative, which is a really, really fantastic organization, and they provided us with a couple of additional trainings that really got more into depth about how to adapt our curriculum and materials, typical triggers and things to avoid with each type of disability that you may commonly find in a special education classroom, lots of strategies to build relationships with students, how to deliver and manage classroom activities, how best to coordinate with the special education teachers, you know, a real boots on the ground perspective, which has helped us tremendously. And so we are about 1.5 years into this process. I'd say it took us a few months in the beginning of the last school year to really get our feet under us and figure out how to best market the services and, you know, kind of work out some of the kinks. So I would say we've really been rolling on this for about the last year, so maybe half of the last school year and then up until now for this school year. And we have enrolled about 226 students so far at 33 different schools. And I really feel that this is a very tip of the iceberg. This is a great start to what I envision to be an even bigger impact with the students in our region. And I'll have to say that just from a partnership perspective, it's been tremendously valuable being able to work together with our VRS partners and play off each other's strengths. That's really the key to a successful relationship that this has become. And so in summary here's some sample activities beyond just our presentations that I mentioned before, our topical presentations. Just some ways that we've been able to integrate pre-ETH students into some of our traditional youth programming. We normally have a pretty big summer youth work experience. We do a kickoff event for that every year, and last year we invited pre-ETH students to participate in that, and that was great fun. We've had great success using the explorework.com website, which I'm sure many folks on the phone are familiar with, but it's been a great tool for us to kind of facilitate in a classroom setting to do activities and exploration using that resource. And in many cases, we've been able to enroll pre-ETH students in our Title I programming, either as in-school youth, out-of-school youth, or even after graduation through our Title I adult program. It is a tremendous partnership. We all absolutely benefit from working closer together. We can provide more resources to the people we have in common, and it really is worth, if you don't have those relationships already, to start working on how you can develop those. And like I said before, it very much is those personal relationships make all the difference. So if you can get all your staff together and start to get to know each other, that's probably the best place to start if you're not already co-located. Just to the right on this slide is a quote from one of my pre-ETH counselors, Thor Berglund, that sums up his experience with pre-ETHs, but he also shared a story with me that I'd like to share with you all to kind of wrap up my portion here. His story is, when we talked about self-advocacy, a girl shared about being bullied for her disability throughout her academic career, and that she felt she could share more with her peers with disabilities. We fostered our lesson of self-advocacy around her willingness to share and stick up not only for herself, but her peers, classmates, and friends that reside within the class. Self-advocacy was brought to life with her bravery and sharing, and within the conversation from the rest of the class. And that's really been a common theme that I've heard from a lot of my staff, is how enriching this experience has been. It's been a little nerve-wracking too, because as I said, we are not VRS counselors, but we've really learned a lot and have been able to bring our expertise to bear in this unique way. We've got plans for the future. We're going to be doing some summer work experience for pre-ETs this summer in coordination with our local VRS counselors, so we make sure that we're providing that great solid foundation of support for these students. We're working on a different way to work with our special education teachers so we can really establish expectations up front. For instance, we'd like the teachers to stick around in the room while we're there. That hasn't always been the case. So those are just some of the little bugs that we're working out. But partnership is such a win-win, as I said, for both of us, for both Title I and Title V. Working in collaboration has enhanced everything that we do. And this being said, I know that Minnesota is structured a bit differently than many other states who maybe have not benefited from the experience of that deliberate co-location. But as I said, even if you're not, I really do encourage you all to seek out your Title I partners and get to know them better, because it can really, truly only better everything that we do. And we really are all better when we work together. So with that, I'll conclude. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Alyssa and Michelle. Some really amazing information and great partnerships to see the transition age youth benefiting from both systems and the collaboration to make these things happen. We know pre-ETs is a huge compliance requirement for all of the voc rehab agencies across the nation, and it's really great to see you guys doing it together. We do have the contact information on this slide, but it's also, if you download the PowerPoint from the download materials, you can access their information on your own, and as well as information for Thomas, Kate, and myself. I did want to mention that if any of your states are not receiving targeted and or intensive technical assistance from the YTAC, and you want more information about, in general, what we do and the services we can provide, or specifically around this curriculum guide, the partnership development, any more information about the upcoming webinars, please do reach out to us. You have our email address here, as well as our website, and you can follow us on social media. And like Kate mentioned, and thank you, we do have the second part of the webinar series taking place tomorrow, and it is on part 2 of the curriculum guide. So hopefully you all have registered and will be able to join us again for another hour tomorrow. We have a link here where you can also sign up for the YTAC newsletter. That'll link you to our website where you can get more information, and if you scroll all the way to the bottom on the right is where you can find the sign up for the newsletter. And last but not least, I just want to remind you what we mentioned at the very beginning. Really important for us to get your feedback through the evaluation. A reminder to those of you that might be seeking the CRC credits to ensure that you do the evaluation, as well as connect with Jessica Fuentes-Diaz to put in your request so that we can follow up with you later once we hopefully have them approved. So what I'd like to do just real quickly, if there are any questions whatsoever, you all can type them in the chat box. We have a couple minutes left. And with our experts that we have on, I'd love to take advantage of having them on. So are there any questions that you would like to ask of Alyssa, Michelle, Thomas, Kate, myself? Give you a second to type them in if you do. And again, Debbie, if you came on late, what you'll need to do for the CRC is complete the evaluation, and then you need to stay in communication with Jessica Fuentes-Diaz. And if you download the PowerPoint, you will have her email address. Let's see, we've got a question. How do people provide the pre-employment transition services curriculum for out-of-school youth?
Should I answer that? This is Alyssa.
Yes.
Well, I was just going to say, in order to be able to be served by pre-ETs, you have to be a student. So you couldn't be an out-of-school youth for pre-ETs, but you could certainly use the same curriculum in other formats. But for pre-ETs, you have to be a student.
Correct. Thank you for that. And Andrew wants to know how we can sign up for tomorrow's webinar. If you go to the YTAC website or the link that Jessica just put in the chat box, you can sign up for tomorrow's webinar as well as the third webinar that will take place April 1st. Any other questions? Chris says, I'd be interested in best practices for connecting with youth and their parents, especially when the student is under 18 and requires parental approval. And I don't know if Alyssa or Michelle or Kate or Thomas have anything they want to share right now, or if that's something that maybe, Chris, if you want to be in contact with someone specific, we can work with you on that information.
I would just say, this is Michelle, that another thing that's actually a great partnership is that oftentimes I have staff that participate in transition meetings, IEP, the transition meetings, and parents are often there, and that's been a great way for us to connect with parents on that.
Thank you. All righty, well, we are at 3:01 Eastern, so I think we will end our webinar, and thank you all for your time today. We had over 170 participants, and we appreciate that, and we look forward to tomorrow. So thank you all and have a great day.